Welcome to the second lesson in our short course on preparing an app for upload, preparing icons and splash screens for iOS. In this lesson, we're going to be concentrating on creating the splash screens for iOS and Android. For this project, we will be creating 5 splash screens for Android. These splash screens are LDPI Portrait at 200 by 320 pixels, MDPI Portrait at 320 by 480 pixels, HDPI Portrait at 480 by 800 pixels, XHDPI Portrait at 720 by 1280 pixels, and the XXHDPI Portrait at 960 by 1600 pixels. Like with the icons, these are for different screen densities on Android. With this project, we're only creating the 5 in portrait. That's because our app looks better in portrait. So we are, in a later video, going to show you how to force the app to only be portrait. So that way we get away with not having to make the landscape splash screens. Otherwise we'd end up having to make 10 splash screens for this project. But if we did need to make the landscape splash screens, what we would have to do is, for say the LDPI, we have the LDPI portrait already at 200 by 320 pixels. Instead, we would create an LDPI landscape file and just reverse the dimensions to 320 by 200 pixels. Now we move on to the iOS splash screens that we need for this project. The first one is default iPhone.png at 320 by 480 pixels. This is for iPhones and iPods that have a non-retina display. The next one is the default at 2 times for iPhone, 640 by 960 pixels. This is again for iPhone and iPods, but with a retina display. We have default portrait for iPad at 768 by 1024 pixels. This is for iPads that don't have a retina display. Default portrait at 2 times for iPad at 1536 by 2048 pixels. This is for iPads that have retina display. Default -568H at 2 times for iPhone at 640 by 1136 pixels. This is for iPhone 5 and they only come with the retina display. Default 667H at 750 by 1334 pixels is for the iPhone 6, and default 736H at 1242 by 2208 pixels is for the iPhone 6 Plus. Again, like with the Android, as we're only forcing our app into portrait mode, we don't need to create the landscape versions, but if we did need to create the landscape versions, what we would need to do is, say for the default 736H, we would create another file, default-landscape-736H, and just reverse the dimensions of the image. Now for both iOS and Android, just like our icons were, our splash screens also need to be saved out as PNG. iOS will actually reject any application to the App Store if it is not saved as a PNG. So now it's time for us to go and create our splash screens. So the first thing that we need to do is go and open up Fireworks. Go to File and New. I remember our largest splash screen was 1536 by 2048, and we're going to use the blue background that we used for our icons as well. So we hit OK, and we're going to change our zoom to something that we can see the entire splash screen, well, at least the the majority of it. Now, because we are just doing a basic splash screen, I'm just going to use the graphic that we used in our icon. So I'm just going to open up my icon work file, click on the graphic that we use, copy it, and I'm going to bring it across into our splash screen. Hold down Shift, if I can click on the button, I'm going to resize it. Now, because there is an issue on iOS with splash screens going underneath the status bar when it comes up on your screen, you need to make sure that you keep all your graphics and any other elements away from the top of the screen. Make sure that it's at least 20 pixels down. So if you've got a border going around it, just make sure that that border stops 20 pixels from the top, because otherwise it's going to show up underneath that status bar and it's going to look rather unprofessional. So I'm going to just put the icon work that we had before in, make sure it's centered, and then I'm going to add a text box underneath. Definitely going to have to resize that. I'm just going to put in restaurant app. Make sure the text is centered, and I'm going to resize it so that it actually can be seen. Keep going. That'll do for now. Try and make yours look a little prettier than what this is. Move it up from the bottom a little bit. Make sure it's centered. That'll do us. Go up into the Optimize tab. Make sure that you have clicked on the PNG 8. Fiddle with the colors if you want. Just make sure that your file size is down as low as possible. And then go to File, Export, and we're going to create a new folder for splash screens. Go into there. And remember, the file name that we needed to give this was default-portrait at 2x for iPad, and it was to be a PNG. Save it out, and if I take a look in the folder that we just saved it into, there we go, we have default portrait at 2x for iPad, and it's PNG. And now we're right to move on to the next splash screen. Make sure that we're not clicked on anything. Go down to the properties selector, hit canvas size, and the canvas size for the next image is 1242 by 2208, and hit OK. And now we just need to make sure that we're happy with what we've got. If you need to, start moving things around, resizing them, repositioning them. Just make sure everything's centered as it should be. And once you're happy, it's time to export. Go to File, go down to Export, make sure that we're still in the splash screens folder, and the name for this one was default-736H PNG. Save, and it's time to move on to the next one. I'm going to stop now, and you can go back through the video, find all your file names and file sizes, go through and make all those splash screens, and when you come back we'll move on to the next video and we'll show you how to put these splash screens and icons into your app.